Hello, everyone. I know many of you are listening to this while preparing for sleep. Before we begin, take a moment to notice where you are and what time it is for you right now. You don't need to type anything if you're already drifting off. And if you enjoy calm stories like this, you can gently support the channel by liking and subscribing whenever you feel comfortable. Now, let the rain fade into the background and allow the story to unfold slowly. The man who never came home lived a life so ordinary that it blended into the background of the city. His name was Daniel, and most people who knew him would struggle to recall anything remarkable about him. He worked regular hours, paid his bills on time, and followed routines that rarely changed. That consistency was part of who he was. It made the events of that quiet evening all the more unsettling. On the night he disappeared, Daniel left his office just after sunset. The sky was already darkening, and a light drizzle had begun to fall, soft enough to feel calming rather than threatening. He walked through the parking lot, unlocked his car, and sat for a moment before starting the engine. As he often did, he sent a short message to his wife. He wrote that he was on his way home and that traffic looked light. It was the kind of message that carried no urgency, no hint of concern, just reassurance. The drive home should have taken no more than 20 minutes. Daniel knew the route well. He had driven it hundreds of times, passing the same intersections, the same streetlights, the same quiet shops closing for the night. Nothing about the journey suggested danger. There were no reports of accidents, no unusual weather warnings, no disruptions on the road. When Daniel did not arrive home at his usual time, his wife assumed he had been delayed. Perhaps he had stopped for fuel or run into a colleague. She continued with her evening, checking the clock occasionally, but not feeling alarmed. It was only when an hour passed, then another, that worry began to settle in. She tried calling his phone. It rang, unanswered. She sent another message. There was no reply. By midnight, the calm of the evening had been replaced with quiet anxiety. Daniel had never stayed out without notice. He had never ignored calls like this before. The next morning, when he still had not returned, his wife contacted the police. Officers took the report seriously but cautiously. Adults go missing for many reasons, they explained. Sometimes people need space. Sometimes there are misunderstandings. Still, they agreed to look into it. Later that day, Daniel's car was found parked on a side street not far from his home. It was positioned neatly along the curb, as though he had parked it deliberately. The doors were locked, the windows were closed. Inside, everything appeared normal. His wallet was in the glove compartment. His phone was on the passenger seat, powered off. There were no signs of a struggle, no damage to the vehicle, no indication that anyone else had been inside. This discovery raised more questions than answers. If Daniel had made it this close to home, why had he not gone inside? Why had he left his phone behind? Investigators searched the surrounding area, checking alleys, nearby buildings, and backyards. No one reported hearing anything unusual. No one remembered seeing Daniel after that evening. As days turned into weeks, the case grew quieter. Police examined Daniel's finances and found nothing suspicious. His bank accounts were untouched. There were no unusual withdrawals, no large purchases, no signs of preparation for travel. His workplace confirmed that he had left as usual, without conflict or distress. Friends and family described him as content, stable, and dependable. The absence of clues made the situation even more troubling. There was no clear reason for Daniel to disappear, and no evidence to suggest he had been taken by force. The investigation stalled, held back by the lack of direction. Flyers were distributed, tips were followed, each one led to nothing. Daniel's wife struggled with the uncertainty. Without answers, time seemed to move differently. Every sound outside made her look up. Every phone call brought a flicker of hope. But days passed without news, then months, then years. The routines of life slowly returned, but the unanswered questions remained. The case was revisited several times over the years. New investigators reviewed old files, hoping fresh eyes might see something others had missed. They found the same facts, the same silence. Daniel had left work, sent a message, driven most of the way home, and vanished somewhere between his car and his front door. There was no conclusion, no resolution to mark an ending. only the quiet presence of an absence. Daniel's story became one of those cases that linger in the background, not because of dramatic twists, but because of how simple and unexplained it was. And as the nights grew quiet and the world continued on, the man who never came home remained exactly that. A memory, a mystery, and a reminder that sometimes, even the most ordinary lives can slip away without leaving a trace. The house with the lights always on stood at the end of a quiet street, where nothing ever seemed to change. The road was lined with similar homes, each with trimmed lawns and parked cars that rarely moved after sunset. Neighbors followed routines so predictable that any small difference was noticed immediately. That was why the light caught their attention. At first, no one thought much of it. Porch lights were often left on overnight for safety, and some people simply forgot to turn CM off. But this light never went off. Not during the day, not during the night. Rain or sunshine, the soft yellow glow remained steady, shining through the front window. Days passed. Then weeks. People began to notice that no one had been seen entering or leaving the house. No car arrived. No trash bins were placed at the curb. Mail piled up in the small box by the door, slowly bending under its own weight. Still, the light stayed on. The house belonged to a woman named Eleanor. She had lived there alone for many years. She was quiet, polite, and kept mostly to herself. Neighbors remembered her as someone who waved gently, but never lingered for conversation. She had no close family nearby, and few people knew much about her daily life. When a month passed without any sign of movement, a neighbor finally called the authorities. Police arrived on a calm afternoon and knocked on the door. There was no answer. They knocked again, louder this time. Still nothing. The door was unlocked. Inside, the house was strangely orderly. Furniture was in place. Dishes were clean and stacked neatly. There was no sign of a struggle, no broken objects, no indication that anything had gone wrong. The air felt still, as if the house itself was holding its breath. The light that had drawn attention in the first place was switched on in the living room. It illuminated a space that looked untouched, as though someone had simply stepped out for a moment and planned to return shortly. Investigators searched every room. Eleanor's bedroom showed no signs of packing or travel. Her clothes remained in the closet. Personal items were where they should have been. The kitchen held no spoiled food, suggesting she had not left suddenly during a meal. Her purse was missing, but her wallet was found in a drawer. There were no notes, no messages, no clues. Neighbors were questioned, but no one recalled seeing Eleanor leave. No taxis had been called. No visitors were reported. Security cameras from nearby homes showed nothing unusual. It was as if Eleanor had quietly faded away within the walls of her own home. Police checked financial records. Her bank account showed no activity after a certain date. Bills were unpaid, but not intentionally canceled. There was no evidence of planning, no indication that she wanted to disappear. The case slowly went cold. The house was eventually secured. The light finally turned off by authorities. But even after that, the memory of it lingered. People walking down the street would glance at the darkened windows, remembering how that soft glow had shone day and night, quietly signaling that something was wrong. Eleanor was never found. Over time, new families moved into the neighborhood. The story was told less often, softened by repetition, but those who remembered still spoke of it in hushed tones, especially at night. The house with the lights always on became a reminder that sometimes, the most unsettling mysteries do not announce themselves loudly. They reveal themselves slowly, through small details that refuse to be ignored. And even now, when the street grows quiet and the night settles in, some neighbors say they still expect to see that familiar light glowing in the window, waiting for someone who never came back. The last call from the payphone was made late at night, when the road was quiet and the air felt heavy with stillness. The highway stretched on in both directions, lit only by occasional streetlights that flickered softly against the dark. Few cars passed at that hour, and those that did moved quickly, as if eager to be somewhere else. Her name was Laura. She was driving alone, returning from a long visit with a friend in a nearby town. It wasn't an unfamiliar drive. She had taken the same route many times before, memorizing every curve and exit. That night, however, something felt different, though she couldn't explain why. About halfway through the journey, Laura pulled over at a small rest area. It was little more than a parking space, a vending machine, and an old payphone standing under a dim light. Her mobile phone battery had been unreliable lately, and she didn't trust it to last the entire trip. She decided to make a quick call. She dialed her friend's number. When her friend answered, Laura spoke quietly, almost cautiously. She said she didn't know why, but she felt uneasy. She mentioned that a car had been behind her for a while, following at a distance that made her uncomfortable. Her friend suggested she stay on the line, maybe even call the police if she felt threatened. Laura paused, listening. Then she said she thought she was overreacting. She laughed softly, trying to reassure both herself and the person on the other end of the line. The road was probably just empty, she said. It was late. That was all. The call ended without drama. No shouting, no panic. Just a goodbye and a promise to text when she got home. That text never came. The next morning, Laura's car was reported missing. It was found days later, abandoned several miles away from the payphone. The doors were unlocked. The interior was undisturbed. There were no signs of damage, no indication of a struggle. Near the rest area, investigators found the payphone. It was working, but rarely used. There were no security cameras nearby. The area was too isolated, too forgotten. Laura's mobile phone was never recovered. Police retraced her route, speaking to anyone who might have been on the road that night. No one remembered seeing anything unusual. No one recalled a car matching the description Laura had mentioned. Traffic records showed nothing out of place. Her bank accounts remained untouched. Her social media went silent. There was no activity, no trace of movement. It was as if the moment she hung up the phone, her life simply paused. As weeks turned into months, the case slowly lost attention. Without evidence, without witnesses, there was little investigators could do. The unanswered questions piled up quietly. Who was the car she mentioned? Was there really someone following her, or was it just a feeling that came from driving alone at night? Her family listened to the recording of that final call many times. Each time, they searched her voice for hidden meaning, for fear she hadn't expressed, for a warning they might have missed. But the call was calm, ordinary, almost comforting. Years passed, and the payphone was eventually removed. The rest area grew over with weeds. The highway was repaved, smoothed out, made newer and quieter. But the memory of that call remained. A simple conversation, made in passing, became the last known sound of Laura's voice. No answers followed, no resolution arrived, just a quiet road, an empty phone booth, and a question that lingered in the silence. And even now, when the night is still, and the roads feel endless, some stories remain suspended in that moment between dialing a number and hanging up the phone, never quite reaching their destination. The train station disappearance happened on a night that felt ordinary in every way. The platforms were clean, the lights bright, and the schedule ran on time. People moved through the space with the calm urgency of routine, tickets in hand, bags slung over shoulders, eyes fixed on departure boards that flickered quietly above. His name was Marcus. He was 36, worked in logistics and traveled often for his job. That night, he arrived at the station shortly after 9, planning to take the last train home. Security cameras captured him entering through the main doors, pausing to check the board, and walking toward the ticket machines. Nothing about his posture suggested stress. Nothing about his pace suggested haste. He purchased a ticket and folded it neatly into his wallet. He sent a brief message to his brother, saying he'd be home late but not to wait up. It was a normal message, like so many before it, meant to explain a small delay and nothing more. Cameras showed Marcus moving toward the platform. He stood beneath the lights, scrolling briefly on his phone, then slipping it back into his pocket. Other passengers waited nearby, some alone, some in pairs. A train arrived on an adjacent track, doors opening with a soft mechanical sigh. People boarded, people left. Time moved forward in small, steady increments. The train Marcus was meant to board arrived a few minutes later. He did not get on. Security footage showed the doors closing, the train pulling away, and the platform clearing. Marcus was no longer visible. There was no footage of him exiting the station. No camera captured him entering a restroom, a shop, or a service corridor. He simply stopped appearing. When Marcus didn't arrive home that night, his brother assumed he had missed the train and found another way back. It wasn't unusual for plans to change. It wasn't until the next morning, when calls went unanswered and messages went unread, that concern began to grow. By afternoon, police were notified. Investigators reviewed hours of footage, replaying the same moments again and again. They tracked Marcus from the entrance to the platform with certainty. After that, there was nothing. No exit, no boarding, no sign of confusion or distress. They searched the station thoroughly. Storage rooms, maintenance areas, and tunnels were checked. Dogs were brought in. Staff were questioned. No one remembered speaking to Marcus. No one recalled an argument, a confrontation, or anything out of place. His phone last connected to the network inside the station. Then it went silent. Police considered every possibility. Perhaps he left with someone he knew. Perhaps he stepped outside where cameras didn't reach. Perhaps there was an area overlooked in the initial search. Each theory fell apart under scrutiny. The station was designed to record movement, yet Marcus had moved in a way that left no trace. Days passed, then weeks. Posters went up near the station entrance. Commuters glanced at the familiar face as they hurried past. Tips came in, sightings reported miles away, rumors shared online, but none could be confirmed. Marcus's bank account remained untouched. His work laptop was still at his apartment. There were no signs of planning, no farewell messages, no history of wanting to disappear. His life, like his final journey, had been carefully scheduled. The case grew quieter over time. Investigators revisited it periodically, hoping advances in technology might reveal something new. They enhanced footage, examined timestamps, searched for gaps. Still nothing. The station continued to operate as always. Trains arrived and departed. Announcements echoed softly through the halls. People came and went, unaware of the unanswered question woven into the space. Marcus was never found. Some mysteries are loud, marked by chaos and urgency. Others are quiet, defined by absence. This was one of those. A man entered a place designed to be observed from every angle, and somehow slipped between moments. Even now, late at night, when platforms are nearly empty and the lights hum steadily overhead, the station holds that unanswered pause. The space where someone should have been seen leaving but never was. The room that was locked from the inside belonged to a woman named Clara, and it sat on the third floor of an old apartment building that rarely drew attention. The building was quiet, its hallways narrow and softly lit, carrying the faint echoes of footsteps and closing doors. Clara had lived there for several years, keeping to herself, known only by polite greetings and brief nods to neighbors. Her life was simple and carefully ordered. She worked from home, preferred evenings alone, and spoke regularly with a small circle of friends. Nothing about her routine suggested instability or distress. She paid her rent on time, answered messages promptly, and never disappeared without explanation. That is why her silence felt wrong. It began when a close friend tried calling her one evening and received no answer. At first, it was brushed off. Clara often took long baths or turned her phone off while working. But when the calls continued into the next day with no response, concern began to grow. Messages went unread. Emails bounced back unanswered. By the third day, worry had replaced patience. The building manager was contacted and agreed to check on her. When he reached Clara's door, he found it locked. He knocked, called out her name, and waited. There was no reply. The apartment was quiet, too quiet. Police were called. When officers arrived, they examined the door carefully. There were no signs of forced entry. The lock was intact. The windows, visible from the outside, were closed and secured. With permission, they entered the apartment using a master key. Inside, everything was exactly as it should have been. Clara's apartment was clean and orderly. Her coat hung by the door. Shoes were neatly lined along the wall. The kitchen showed no signs of recent activity. No dirty dishes, no half-prepared meals. The air felt still, as though time had paused. In the bedroom, her bed was neatly made. On the nightstand, her phone sat plugged into the charger. It was powered off. Her laptop rested on the desk, closed. Her purse was on a chair, containing her wallet and identification. There was no sign that Clara had packed to leave. No missing clothes. No suitcase pulled from the closet. Nothing suggested a sudden departure. The most unsettling detail was the door. It had been locked from the inside. Investigators checked the lock mechanism thoroughly. It was a standard lock, one that could not engage from the outside without a key. Windows were inspected next. None were open. None showed signs of tampering. The apartment offered no visible way in or out besides the door. Neighbors were questioned. No one recalled hearing unusual noises. No arguments. No cries for help. No late-night visitors. One neighbor mentioned hearing footsteps in the hallway around midnight a few nights earlier, but that was common in the building, and offered no clear lead. Police examined Clara's digital records. Her bank account showed no activity after a certain point. No withdrawals, no purchases. Her email and social media accounts were inactive. There was no indication she had contacted anyone about leaving. Days passed as investigators returned to the apartment again and again, searching for details they might have missed. They checked vents, closets, and even the ceiling panels. Everything led back to the same conclusion: Clara had vanished from a locked room without leaving a trace. The case attracted quiet attention. People were drawn to its impossible nature. How could someone disappear from a sealed space? Some suggested she had left willingly and carefully staged the scene. Others believed there must have been a detail overlooked, something subtle that explained the locked door, but no explanation ever held up. Weeks turned into months. The apartment remained empty, sealed off as evidence. Dust slowly settled on the furniture. The hallway outside continued to echo with everyday life, while Clara's space remained froze. And in time, her friends struggled most with the uncertainty. Without answers, grief had no shape. They replayed conversations, searching for hints of trouble they might have missed. There were none. Clara had seemed calm, focused, and content. Eventually, the investigation slowed. Without evidence of a crime, without a body, without even a direction to pursue, the case went cold. The apartment was released back to the building. A new tenant eventually moved in. The lock was replaced. The walls were repainted. Life continued. But the question never fully faded. Some nights, when the building is quiet, and the lights in the hallway dim, residents still think about the woman who vanished from a room that should have kept her safe. A place with no exit became the center of an unanswered mystery, and somewhere between locked doors and silent walls, Clara's story remained suspended, waiting for an explanation that never came. The letter arrived on a quiet morning, many years after Hope was supposed to be gone. It came in an ordinary white envelope, slipped among bills and advertisements, looking no different from any other piece of mail. The family almost ignored it. There was nothing to suggest that it carried the weight of the past inside it. The son they had lost was named Michael. He disappeared when he was 22, leaving behind a life that seemed unfinished. At the time, he was living on his own, working a modest job, and saving money with vague plans for the future. He spoke to his parents regularly. He checked in. He showed up for birthdays and holidays. There had been no arguments, no dramatic goodbyes, no signs that he wanted to leave. The night Michael vanished, he was supposed to meet a friend. When he didn't show up, it was assumed he had changed plans. When his phone went unanswered the next day, concern began to grow. By the end of the week, police were LV'd. Searches were conducted. Friends were questioned. Posters were printed and taped to walls and street poles. Nothing came of it. Michael's bank account showed no activity. His apartment was found just as he had left it. Clothes in the closet, dishes clean, his passport untouched. There was no evidence that he had traveled, no indication that he had planned to disappear. As the months passed, hope softened into something quieter. His parents continued to wait, but they learned to live with uncertainty. Years went by. His name was mentioned less often, not because he was forgotten, but because saying it hurt in a way that never dulled. And then the letter arrived. It was addressed to his parents, written in handwriting they recognized instantly. The way the letters curved, the slight slant, the uneven spacing. It was unmistakably his. Their hands shook as they opened it. Inside was a single sheet of paper. No greeting, no explanation. Just one sentence written carefully, as if chosen with effort. "I'm sorry I never came back." There was no return address. No date. No postmark that led anywhere useful. The envelope itself had been mailed from a city far away, one Michael had no known connection to. Police were contacted immediately. The letter was examined, tested, analyzed. The handwriting matched Michael's. The paper was ordinary. The ink was common. There were no fingerprints that could be used. No DNA. Nothing that revealed when or where it had been written. Investigators revisited the case with renewed attention. Old files were reopened. Old leads were reviewed. New theories emerged. Perhaps Michael had left by choice. Perhaps he had started a new life and later regretted it. Perhaps the letter was written long ago and only mailed recently. But none of these ideas could be proven. The family was left with something they had not expected. Not closure, but confirmation. The letter suggested that Michael had survived beyond the day he vanished. It suggested intention, awareness, regret, and yet it explained nothing. Why had he left? Why had he stayed away for so long? Why send only one sentence after all those years, with no way to respond? His parents read the letter over and over. They tried to hear his voice in the words. They tried to imagine where he had been when he wrote it. Alone in a small room, perhaps, or sitting somewhere public, surrounded by strangers who had no idea who he was. The letter became both comfort and torment. It meant Michael had lived. But it also meant he had chosen not to return. Years passed again. No second letter arrived. No further contact followed. The case remained open but inactive. The letter was filed away as evidence, its meaning still unresolved. To this day, no one knows where Michael went or what his life became. The single sentence he sent back across time is all that remains of him. A quiet apology, arriving too late to answer the questions it left behind. And in the stillness of night, when the house is quiet and memories come easily, his parents sometimes imagine him writing that letter, pausing between words, wondering if it would ever reach them. It did, but it brought no ending, only a softer, deeper mystery, sealed inside an envelope that arrived long after the waiting was supposed to end. The neighbor everyone trusted lived in a house that looked just like the others on the street. The paint was clean, the lawn was trimmed, and the porch light came on at the same time every evening. Nothing about the place stood out, and neither did the man who lived there. His name was Thomas. He waved every morning as people left for work. He helped carry groceries when he saw someone struggling. He returned lost packages to the right door and kept an eye on things when neighbors were When people described him, they used words like kind, quiet, reliable. No one locked their doors because of Thomas. The woman who disappeared lived 2 houses down. Her name was Helen. She was in her early 30s, worked long hours, and kept mostly to herself. She exchanged polite greetings with Thomas, nothing more. She was careful, organized, and predictable in her habits. When Helen failed to show up for work one Monday, her employer assumed she was sick. By Tuesday, concern had grown. By Wednesday, police were notified. Her apartment was found locked. Inside, everything appeared normal. Her purse was missing, but her wallet remained on the kitchen counter. There were no signs of a struggle, no broken items, no forced entry. It looked like she had simply stepped out and never returned. The neighborhood reacted with quiet worry. People shared theories in hushed voices, standing in small groups on sidewalks. Thomas was there too, listening, nodding sympathetically, offering to help however he could. He volunteered information. He told police he had seen nothing unusual. Investigators questioned everyone nearby. No one recalled hearing anything strange. No one had seen Helen leave. Security cameras from nearby homes showed nothing helpful. The street, usually so familiar, offered no answers. As weeks passed, the case lost urgency. There were no leads, no evidence of foul play, no direction to follow. Helen's name joined a list of missing persons, and life slowly returned to its routines. Years went by. The neighborhood changed. New families moved in. Old ones moved away. Thomas remained. He grew older, a little quieter, but just as dependable. He still waved. He still helped. People trusted him without thinking. Then, during a routine inspection related to a property dispute, something unexpected happened. City workers entered Thomas's home to check the found at. While examining a storage area beneath the house, they noticed a space that didn't match the original building plans. A wall had been added, carefully concealed. It wasn't obvious. It wasn't sloppy. It was deliberate. Police were called. Behind the hidden wall was a small room. It was empty when it was found, but the signs were unmistakable. Personal items that didn't belong to Thomas. Clothing, a handbag. Objects that had no reason to be there. Among them were items identified as Helen's. The discovery sent a shock through the neighborhood. People struggled to reconcile what they were seeing with the man they thought they knew. The friendly neighbor. The helpful presence. The familiar wave. Thomas was questioned extensively. At first he denied everything. He claimed he had found the items and meant to return them. Then his story changed. Small details shifted. Timelines didn't line up. Eventually he stopped talking altogether. Without a body, without direct evidence of what had happened inside that hidden space, the case remained incomplete. Charges were limited. Some questions could not be answered in a courtroom. Helen was never found. The neighborhood never felt the same again. People began locking their doors. Conversations grew shorter. Smiles felt cautious. Trust, once freely given, became something fragile. Thomas's house was eventually sold. The hidden room was sealed. New walls covered the past, but no renovation could erase the memory of what had been discovered there. The story became a quiet warning, passed along when someone new moved in. A reminder that familiarity does not always mean safety, that sometimes the most unsettling things hide behind ordinary faces. And on that once peaceful street, when the evening grows quiet and porch lights begin to glow, people still think about the neighbor everyone trusted, and the silence that followed when the truth finally came to light. The car left running was discovered on a lonely stretch of road just before dawn, when the night was beginning to fade, but the world was still quiet. A thin layer of fog hovered close to the ground, and the steady sound of rain had softened every surface. The road itself was rarely busy, used mostly by locals heading home late, or workers starting early shifts. A passing driver noticed the car first. It was pulled over on the shoulder, hazard lights blinking slowly, engine still running. At first glance it looked like someone had stopped temporarily, maybe to take a phone call or check directions. But as the driver passed, something felt wrong. The driver's door was wide open. Police were called. When officers arrived, they found the vehicle exactly as described. The engine hummed quietly. The headlights cut through the mist. Rainwater pooled around the tires. Inside the car, everything was in place. A wallet lay on the passenger seat. A mobile phone rested in the cup holder. A jacket was folded neatly in the back. There was no driver. The car belonged to a man named Andrew. He was in his early 40s, worked in sales, and had been driving home from a late meeting the night before. According to colleagues, he had left in good spirits, making casual plans for the weekend. There was no indication that he was upset or distracted. Investigators searched the immediate area. The rain had washed away any clear footprints, leaving the ground smooth and unmarked. Nearby fields were checked. Ditches were examined. There were no signs of a struggle, no discarded items, no indication that someone else had been involved. Andrew's phone was examined. The last outgoing call had been made more than an hour before the car was found. The call was brief and unremarkable. No emergency calls, no messages sent afterward. Police retraced Andrew's route using traffic cameras. They confirmed that he had been driving normally, stopping only where the car was later discovered. There were no sudden turns, no signs of erratic behavior. The footage showed his headlights pulling over, then nothing more. Friends and family were questioned. Andrew had no known enemies. He was financially stable. He had no history of disappearing or acting impulsively. His home showed no signs of preparation for leaving. Clothes, documents, and personal items were all accounted for. As days passed, theories began to circulate quietly. Some suggested a medical emergency. Others wondered if he had stepped out of the car briefly and wandered off in the rain, disoriented. But extensive searches found no trace of him nearby. No signs of an accident, no evidence of injury. The unanswered questions grew heavier with time. Why would Andrew leave his car running? Why would he step out without his phone or wallet? Why had he opened the door and walked away into the darkness? Weeks turned into months. The case received occasional attention but offered nothing new. Without evidence, investigators had nowhere to go. Andrew's bank accounts remained untouched. His phone never connected to another network. His car, once a simple detail, became the central symbol of the mystery. Eventually, the road returned to normal. Cars passed. Rain fell. Fog lifted and settled again with the seasons. The spot where the car had been found looked no different from any other stretch of pavement, but for those who knew the story, that place carried a quiet weight, a running engine, an open door, and a man who vanished between one moment and the next. Some mysteries end with answers. Others linger, defined not by what is known, but by what is missing. Andrew's story belongs to the latter, left behind on a silent road where the rain washed away everything except the questions. The disappearance no one noticed began quietly, without alarms or urgency, in a narrow apartment building tucked between larger, busier streets. The building was old, its walls thick and its hallways dim, and the people who lived there tended to keep to themselves. Doors closed softly. Footsteps passed without conversation. It was the kind of place where silence was normal. The man who lived in apartment 3B was named Harold. He was elderly, lived alone, and rarely caused any disturbance. He went out early in the mornings, returned in the afternoons, and spent most evenings inside. He had no close family nearby, and only a few acquaintances who recognized him by sight rather than by name. To most people, he was simply the older man down the hall. No one noticed when his routine stopped. Days passed without anyone seeing him, but this was not unusual. Harold sometimes stayed inside for long stretches, especially during colder weeks. When his door remained closed, neighbors assumed he was resting. Weeks went by. The first real sign that something was wrong came when mail began to pile up outside his door. Letters slid beneath the frame and gathered on the floor. Flyers remained untouched. Still, no one checked. It was easy to believe that Harold was simply away. It wasn't until months later, when unpaid bills triggered a notice from the building management, that anyone intervened. The landlord knocked. There was no answer. After several attempts over a few days, police were called to conduct a welfare check. The door was unlocked with a spare key. There were no signs of forced entry, no damage, no obvious disturbance. Inside, the apartment was eerily normal. Furniture was in place. Dishes were clean. The bed was neatly made. Harold's coat hung by the door. His shoes were lined up carefully against the wall. It did not look like the home of someone who had left suddenly. Was no sign of Harold. Investigators searched the apartment thoroughly. His wallet was found in a drawer. His identification was still there. His phone sat on the table, powered off. His bank account showed no activity after a certain date. No withdrawals, no purchases, no attempts to access funds. Neighbors were questioned. Some said they hadn't seen him in a long time, but couldn't remember exactly when. Others realized, with discomfort, that they hadn't paid attention at all. No one remembered hearing arguments. No one remembered visitors. No one remembered a goodbye. Police expanded the search slightly, checking hospitals, shelters, and nearby areas. There were no matches, no records, no sightings. The case moved slowly, hampered by the lack of information. Without a clear timeline, investigators struggled to determine when Harold had last been seen. Without witnesses, there was no direction to pursue. The disappearance had happened gradually, unnoticed by those closest to it. Over time, the investigation grew quieter. Harold's name was added to missing persons records, but there was little hope of progress. The apartment was eventually cleared and prepared for a new tenant. His belongings were boxed up and stored, labeled neatly with his name. Life in the building continued. New people moved in, old ones moved out. The hallway remained dim and quiet, just as before. The space where Harold once lived filled with new sounds, new routines. But the unsettling truth remained. A man had disappeared, not in a dramatic moment, not during a crisis, but slowly, in the gaps between everyday life. No one noticed when he was gone. No one sounded the alarm until time itself had erased the trail. Harold's story became a quiet reminder of how easily someone can fade away, not because of mystery or danger, but because of absence, because no one was watching closely enough to say. The moment when a life slipped out of view, and somewhere between unopened letters and an unlocked door, his disappearance remains unanswered, defined not by what happened, but by how long it took for anyone to realize he was missing at all. The case that never closed began as something small, almost forgettable, on a quiet morning when police believed they were dealing with a simple incident. There were no flashing headlines, No immediate sense of urgency, just a report that something felt wrong. At the time, no one imagined how long the questions would last. The missing person was named Samuel. He was in his late 30s, lived a modest life, and worked a job that rarely brought attention. He had friends, but not many. Family, but not close by. His life moved forward in steady lines, without sharp turns. When he failed to show up for work one Monday, his employer called his phone. There was no answer. By the end of the day, they assumed he was sick. By the next morning, concern began to grow. Samuel was reliable. He always called if he was going to be late or absent. Police were contacted that afternoon. Officers visited Samuel's apartment. The door was locked. Inside, everything looked normal. His bed was made, his dishes were clean, his clothes were folded neatly in drawers. Nothing appeared broken or disturbed. There were no signs of a struggle, no signs of haste. His wallet was on the kitchen counter. His keys were missing. Investigators traced Samuel's last known movements. He had been seen at a local store the evening before, buying a few groceries. Security footage showed him paying calmly, exchanging a brief smile with a cashier, and leaving alone. Outside, cameras captured him walking toward the parking lot. That was the last confirmed sighting. Witnesses were questioned. Some remembered seeing a man who looked like Samuel walking down the street late that night. Others were unsure. Descriptions varied. Timelines conflicted. Each statement added more uncertainty rather than clarity. Police examined phone records. Samuel had made no calls after leaving the store. His phone stopped connecting to the network sometime that night. Bank records showed no activity, no withdrawals, no purchases, no movement. As days turned into weeks, the case began to slow. Without evidence of a crime, investigators had little to work with. Samuel had not expressed fear or distress to anyone. There were no known enemies, no financial pressure, no reason to believe he wanted to disappear. The file grew thicker, but the answers did not. Over the years, the case was reopened several times. New detectives reviewed the old notes, hoping fresh eyes might catch what others had missed. They followed the same paths, asked the same questions, and reached the same dead ends. Some theories suggested Samuel left voluntarily. Others suggested an accident that was never discovered. Still others believed someone knew more than they had shared. None of these ideas could be proven. Time passed. The people who first worked the case retired. The neighborhood changed. The store where Samuel was last seen closed and reopened under a new name. Streets were repaved. Buildings were renovated. Life moved forward, but the case remained open. Samuel's name stayed in the system, attached to a file that refused to be closed because there was no ending to write, no conclusion to record, no explanation to offer. For his family, the uncertainty was the hardest part. Without answers, grief never settled into something stable. It lingered, shifting shape with each passing year. Every phone call from an unknown number brought a moment of hope. Every update that led nowhere brought quiet disappointment. The case that never closed became exactly that. Not a story of violence or drama, but one of unanswered absence. A reminder that sometimes, even when everything seems calm and ordinary, a life can simply slip out of reach. And somewhere, in a cabinet filled with old files, Samuel's case still waits. Not for attention but for truth. A truth that has remained just out of sight, quietly keeping the case open, year after year, without resolution. She walked out and never returned on an evening that felt soft and unremarkable. The sky was dimming into blue-gray, and the air carried the faint smell of rain that hadn't yet arrived. Her name was Rachel, and she lived alone in a small apartment above a row of shops that closed early. The staircase creaked, the hallway lights hummed, and everything about the place felt familiar and safe. Rachel's routine was simple. She worked regular hours, cooked at home most nights, and took short walks after dinner to clear her head. Neighbors recognized her by habit more than conversation. A nod, a smile, a brief exchange about the weather. Nothing more. That night, she put on a light jacket, slipped her phone into her pocket, and locked the door behind her. She intended to walk a few blocks, maybe stop at the corner store, and return within half an hour. She had done the same thing countless times before. She never came back. When Rachel's phone went straight to voicemail later that night, her sister assumed the battery had died. By morning, concern began to rise. Rachel was not someone who disappeared without notice. She answered messages. She checked in. Silence was not part of her pattern. Police were called, and officers went to the apartment. The door was locked. Inside, everything looked as it should have. Dishes were clean. Her bag was on the chair. The lights were off. There was no sign of packing, no note, no indication she planned to be away. Her phone was missing. Investigators retraced her like lie route, walking the same sidewalks she would have used. They checked nearby stores, asking if anyone remembered seeing her. One clerk recalled a woman matching her description buying a small item and leaving alone. Another thought they might have seen her passing by, but couldn't be certain. Security cameras offered only fragments. A blurry figure walking past a storefront. A timestamp without context. Nothing that clearly showed where she went after that. Rachel's bank account showed no activity after that evening. No purchases, no withdrawals. Her social media went quiet. Friends and coworkers searched their memories for hints of distress, but found none. She had spoken about future plans. She had tickets for an event weeks away. Days turned into weeks. Searches expanded and then narrowed. Tips came in and faded. Each lead ended the same way, with uncertainty. As months passed, the case lost urgency but not weight. Rachel's family learned to live with questions that had no answers. They replayed that ordinary evening again and again, trying to find the moment where something changed. But nothing stood out. She had walked out, just as she always did. The world had continued around her. And somewhere between one familiar step and the next, she vanished. Some disappearances are marked by noise and chaos. Others happen quietly between heartbeats, leaving behind only the echo of a door closing and the unsettling fact that someone simply never returned. The town with too many secrets looked peaceful from the outside. It sat between open fields and a slow river, its streets lined with small shops, modest houses, and familiar faces. People greeted one another by name. Doors were left unlocked. Children rode bicycles until dusk. It was the kind of place that seemed untouched by trouble. But beneath the calm surface, things were not as simple as they appeared. The woman vanished was named Anna. She had moved to the town only a year earlier, felt by the quiet and the promise of a slower life. She rented a small house near the edge of town and worked at the local library. To most people, she was polite, reserved, and a little mysterious. She asked few questions and shared little about her past. Still, she became part of the town's rhythm. Anna showed up to work on time, smiled at visitors, and walked home the same route every evening. She bought groceries at the same store, sat on the same bench by the river on weekends, and waved to the same neighbors. Nothing about her behavior suggested she was unhappy or afraid. Then, one morning, she didn't show up for work. At first, her absence was brushed aside. People assumed she was sick or had taken a personal day. By the afternoon, concern began to spread. Anna had never missed work without calling. When the library manager tried her phone and received no answer, the uneasy feeling grew. Police went to her house that evening. The door was unlocked. Inside, the lights were off and the rooms were quiet. Anna's coat hung by the door. Her shoes were neatly placed beneath it. Her bag rested on a chair, just as it always did. There was no sign of a struggle. No broken items, no indication that anyone else had been there. Her phone and wallet were missing. Neighbors were questioned. Several people said they had seen Anna walking home the night before. Some said she had looked distracted. Others said she seemed completely normal. Timelines varied. Details conflicted. No one could agree on exactly when they had last seen her. As investigators dug deeper, they began to notice patterns that felt uncomfortable. This was not the first disappearance the town had experienced. Over the years, a few people had left without explanation. Each case was different. Each had been explained away at the TI. A move. A misunderstanding. A choice to start over. But taken together, they formed something harder to ignore. Police searched the surrounding area and found nothing. Anna's bank account remained untouched. Her phone never connected to another network. There were no travel records, no messages sent after her disappearance. When investigators tried to learn more about Anna's past, they found very little. She had moved several times. She had kept her records minimal. It was as though she had been careful not to leave too much behind. The town grew uneasy. People began watching one another more closely. Conversations stopped when certain names were mentioned. Old rumors resurfaced. Whispers passed quietly between neighbors who had known each other for decades but suddenly seemed unsure of what to trust. Then the case stalled. Without evidence of a crime, there was little police could do. Anna's name joined a list of unresolved cases, and life slowly returned to normal. Shops reopened. Children rode bicycles again. Doors were locked more often now, but people still smiled and waved. Yet something had changed. Those who lived there felt it most clearly at night, when the streets were quiet and the lights reflected softly off empty roads. The town still looked peaceful, still welcoming, still ordinary. But everyone knew now that appearances could be deceiving. Anna was never found, and the town with too many secrets kept them all, holding its calm expression firmly in place, while unanswered questions settled quietly beneath the surface, waiting for someone brave enough, or unlucky enough, to disturb them again. The letter that arrived years later came on an afternoon that felt no different from any other. The mail carrier slipped envelopes through the slot, and they landed in a familiar pile on the small table near the door. Bills, advertisements, a folded flyer, and on. Envelope that did not belong. It was plain. No return address. The handwriting was careful, slightly uneven, and instantly recognizable. The family froze when they saw it. The man who had disappeared was named Peter. He had been gone for nearly 15 years. At the time, he was in his late 20s, working odd jobs, saving slowly, and talking often about the future without committing to any one plan. He stayed in touch. He called his mother every Sunday. He visited when he could. There had been no argument, no warning, no final goodbye. The day Peter vanished, he told a friend he was heading out to clear his head. He left his apartment with his wallet and keys, locking the door behind him. He never came back. His phone went silent that evening. His bank account stopped showing activity. His life, as far as records could tell, ended quietly. For years his family waited. They filed reports. They answered questions. They followed leads that led nowhere. Over time, the calls from investigators became less frequent. The posters faded. Hope shifted into something softer and heavier, something carried quietly rather than spoken aloud. And then the letter arrived. Inside was a single page. No greeting, no explanation. Just a few lines written in ink that had not faded. "I'm alive. I'm sorry. I couldn't come back. That was all." Police were contacted immediately. The letter was taken, photographed, examined. Handwriting experts confirmed what the family already knew. It was Peter's. The paper was common. The ink was ordinary. There were no fingerprints that could be used, no DNA, no clear postmark that pointed to a specific place. Investigators reopened the case. They checked Peter's old accounts. Still untouched. They searched for activity under his name. Nothing, no records, no sightings that could be verified. The letter had come from a city hundreds of miles away, one Peter had never mentioned before. The family felt torn. Relief mixed with pain. Peter had lived beyond the day he disappeared, but he had chosen distance, silence, a life that did not include them. They read the letter again and again, searching for meaning in the spacing between words, in the slight pressure of the pen. Was he afraid, regretful, at peace? The letter answered nothing. It didn't say. Weeks passed, no second letter came. Investigators waited, hoping for contact, hoping the letter had been a test, a step toward something more, but nothing followed. The trail ended exactly where it began, with a few lines of ink on a page. Years passed again. The letter was returned to the family after the investigation stalled. It was placed carefully in a drawer, protected between folded sheets of paper. Sometimes it was taken out and read. Other times it stayed hidden, too heavy to hold. Peter was never seen again. No one knows where he went, what life he lived, or what finally led him to write those words and send them back across time. The letter remains the only proof that he survived his disappearance. A quiet message from a life lived elsewhere. And for those who received it, the mystery did not end. It only changed shape, settling into a different kind of waiting, one without hope for return, but with the lingering presence of a voice that reached back once, and then fell silent forever. The case that went cold overnight began in a town where news rarely traveled fast, and nothing truly unexpected ever seemed to happen. The streets were quiet after dark, shops closed early, and people measured time by familiar routines rather than clocks. That calm was what made the sudden uncertainty feel so sharp. The missing person was named Jonathan. He was 31, worked at a small hardware store, and lived alone in a modest house near the edge of town. He wasn't someone Ho drew attention. He didn't go out much, didn't argue with anyone, and didn't talk about leaving. His life was steady, simple, and predictable. On the night he disappeared, Jonathan closed the store as usual. A coworker remembered him locking the door, waving goodbye and walking toward his car. Security footage confirmed it. He drove away at his normal pace, headlights disappearing down the familiar road. That was the last confirmed sighting. When Jonathan failed to show up for work the next morning, his manager assumed he was sick. By afternoon, concern grew. Jonathan always called if he was running late or needed time off. When his phone went unanswered and messages remained unread, police were contacted. Officers went to his house that evening. The door was locked. Inside, everything was neat and orderly. His bed was made. The kitchen was clean. His keys were on the counter. His phone was charging in the bedroom. There were no signs of a struggle, no broken items, no indication that anyone else had been there. His car was missing. Police expanded the search quickly, checking nearby roads and parking areas. Late that night, his car was found in a grocery store lot several miles away. It was parked carefully between the lines as if left intentionally. The doors were locked. There was no damage. Nothing inside appeared disturbed. The discovery only deepened the confusion. Why would Jonathan leave his car there and then vanish on foot? Why would he leave behind his phone and keys at home? Investigators questioned coworkers, neighbors, and friends. No one reported arguments or unusual behavior. Jonathan had made plans for the following week. He had spoken casually about fixing up his house. Nothing suggested he was preparing to disappear. Tips came in during the first few days. A possible sighting here, a rumor there. Each one faded under scrutiny. Security cameras around the parking lot showed Jonathan's car arriving, but no clear image of him leaving it. The footage was grainy, incomplete, and unhelpful. By the end of the week, the urgency began to fade. Without evidence of a crime, police had little to pursue. The case shifted from active investigation to quiet monitoring. Jonathan's bank account showed no activity. His social media went silent. There were no signs of travel. The town felt the change. People locked their doors earlier. Conversations paused when the case was mentioned. The idea that someone could vanish so completely unsettled a place built on familiarity. The hardware store reopened, but Jonathan's absence lingered in the empty space behind the counter. Months passed. The case grew colder. New officers reviewed the file, found the same unanswered questions, and moved on. Jonathan's name remained on a list, attached to a file that had no ending. Years later, people still spoke of him occasionally, usually in quiet tones. They wondered what they had missed, what small detail might have explained it all. But nothing ever surfaced. Left his routine life behind without explanation, leaving only locked doors, a parked car, and a town that learned how quickly certainty could disappear. And in the stillness that followed, Jonathan's story remained unfinished, resting quietly among the many questions that time never managed to answer. The hotel room left untouched was discovered after 3 quiet days, when a staff member finally questioned the silence. The hotel itself was modest, built near a highway exit, used mostly by travelers passing through rather than guests who stayed long. Rooms were cleaned quickly. Checkouts were routine. Nothing lingered. The guest in room 214 was named Oliver. He checked in late one evening, signed the register, and carried a single small bag with him. The clerk remembered him clearly because he had been calm and polite, asking only for a wake-up call the next morning. He paid in advance, declined housekeeping, and went up to his room without hesitation. That was the last direct interaction anyone had with him. The wake-up call was placed on schedule. There was no answer. This was not unusual. Some guests slept through calls. The hotel moved on with its morning routine. It wasn't until the 3rd day, when the Do Not Disturb sign still hung on the door and no checkout had occurred, that staff became concerned. Management unlocked the door. Inside, the room looked exactly as it had the night Oliver arrived. The bed was neatly made, untouched. The bathroom was clean, towels folded. The television was off. His bag sat unopened on the desk. Inside it were clothes still neatly packed, along with identification and a wallet. Oliver was not there. There were no signs of a struggle, no damage, no open windows. The door showed no indication it had been forced. Security footage showed Oliver entering the room on the night he checked in. There was no footage of him leaving. Police were called, and the room was examined carefully. Investigators checked hallways, stairwells, exits, and parking areas. Cameras showed no clear movement after Oliver entered his room. No one recalled seeing him in the lobby or outside the building. His phone was found on the nightstand, powered off. Investigators contacted the people listed in his records. No one knew why he had been traveling. No one expected him to be there. He had not mentioned a hotel stay to friends or family. His bank account showed no activity after the night he checked in. Days passed as police tried to piece together a timeline that made sense. Perhaps Oliver had left briefly and returned unnoticed. Perhaps there was a blind spot in the cameras. Perhaps he had exited through an area not covered by security. Each theory failed to explain the untouched room. Weeks turned into months. The hotel room was returned to service. New guests slept in the same bed, unaware of the quiet mystery attached to the space. The case file grew thin, marked by a lack of evidence rather than a lack of effort. Oliver was never found. The room where he stayed remains just another room now, cleaned and reused like any other. But for those who know the story, it carries a different weight. A reminder that sometimes, people pass through places meant to be temporary, and then vanish without leaving any sign that they were ever there at all. The hotel continued operating. Travelers came and went. Life moved forward. But somewhere between check-in and check-out, Oliver's story slipped out of the record, leaving behind a room that stayed perfectly untouched, and a mystery that time has never managed to disturb. The night the porch light stayed on began. Like any other evening in the quiet neighborhood. Houses sat evenly spaced along the street, each with a small yard and a short driveway. Most families turned in early, porch lights switching off one by one as the night deepened. It was easy to tell when someone was home, and just as easy to tell when they weren't. The house at the corner belonged to a man named Victor. Victor lived alone and kept a predictable routine. He left for work at the same time every morning and returned shortly after sunset. His porch light usually came on automatically at dusk and turned off when he went to bed. Neighbors were used to that soft glow disappearing by midnight. But one night, it didn't. At first, no one thought much of it. Porch lights were often left on accidentally. Still, as the night passed and the light continued to shine, it began to feel unusual. By morning, it was still on. Bright. Steady. Days went by. Victor's car remained parked in the driveway. His trash bin stayed by the house instead of being placed on the curb. Mail collected in the box. And the porch light never went off. A neighbor tried knocking on the door. There was no answer. Another neighbor called Victor's phone, but it went straight to voicemail. Concern slowly replaced curiosity. Police were contacted for a welfare check. When officers arrived, they found the front door locked and the windows secured. There were no signs of forced entry. Inside, the house was neat and quiet. Furniture was in place. The kitchen was clean. Victor's shoes were by the door. His jacket hung on its hook, but Victor was gone. His phone was found on the kitchen counter, powered off. His wallet sat in a drawer. Nothing appeared missing. There were no signs of a struggle, no broken items, no indication that anyone else had been there. Investigators searched the area around the house. There were no footprints, no damaged fencing, no discarded belongings. Neighbors were questioned, but no one had seen Victor leave. No visitors were reported. No arguments were heard. Police reviewed Victor's recent activity. His bank account showed no unusual transactions. He had not requested time off work. He had spoken casually to coworkers about routine plans for the following week. As days turned into weeks, the case began to slow. Without evidence of foul play, investigators had little to follow. Victor's disappearance remained unexplained, held in place by small, unsettling details. The porch light was eventually turned off by authorities. But even after that, neighbors said the house felt different, empty in a way that went beyond vacancy, as if something unfinished lingered there. Months passed. The house was eventually sold. New owners moved in. The light fixture was replaced. Life on the street returned to normal. Still, those who remembered would glance at the corner house at night, half expecting to see that familiar glow again. The light that stayed on too long had become a symbol of a quiet mystery. Victor was never found, and in that calm neighborhood where routines once felt comforting, the memory of the porch light served as a reminder that sometimes the smallest details are the ones that reveal how suddenly a life can slip away, leaving only silence behind. The disappearance between home and work happened along a route so familiar that no one ever questioned it. It was a straight drive, less than 15 minutes, passing the same intersections, the same shops, the same traffic lights every day. For years, nothing had ever gone wrong there. The woman who vanished was named Claire. She lived alone in a small apartment and worked as an administrative assistant at a medical office across town. Every weekday morning, she left her home at the same time, carrying the same bag, stopping at the same coffee shop before continuing on to work. Her routine was so consistent that coworkers joked they could set their clocks by her arrival. On the morning she disappeared, Claire followed that routine exactly. Security footage from her apartment building showed her leaving just after 8 a.m. She locked the door behind her, adjusted her coat, and walked toward her car. She appeared calm, unhurried, and alone. There was nothing unusual about her movements. She never arrived at work. When Claire failed to show up by mid-morning, coworkers assumed she was running late. By noon, concern grew. She always called if something came up. When her phone went straight to voicemail, her manager contacted the police. Later that afternoon, Claire's car was found parked along the street only 2 miles from her apartment. It was positioned neatly, not abandoned carelessly. The doors were locked, the windows were up. Inside the car, everything looked normal. Her purse was on the passenger seat, her phone was inside, her wallet was there as well. Claire was missing. Investigators searched the area around where the car was found. Nearby businesses were questioned. Some had cameras, but the footage showed only passing traffic and blurred figures. No one clearly remembered seeing Claire that morning. No one recalled a struggle or a confrontation. Police retraced her expected route. There were no reports of accidents, no emergency calls, no disturbances. The morning had been calm, ordinary, forgettable. Friends and family were interviewed. Claire had no known enemies. She was financially stable. She had plans for the future, including a vacation she had been looking forward to. Nothing suggested she wanted to leave her life behind. As days passed, the case became harder to understand. How could someone disappear from such a short, familiar stretch of road? Why would she leave behind everything he needed? Her phone, her purse, her identification? Weeks turned into months. Searches expanded and then narrowed. Tips came in and faded. Each lead ended the same way, without answers. The space between Claire's home and her workplace became a quiet symbol of the mystery. A small gap in distance, but an enormous gap in understanding. Years later, the case remains unsolved. Claire's disappearance serves as a reminder that even the safest routines, the most ordinary paths, can hold unanswered questions. Somewhere between where she started and where she was meant to arrive, her story slipped into silence. And that short stretch of road continues to exist as it always has, busy, familiar, and unremarkable, carrying with it a mystery that time has never been able to explain. The missing person found 20 years later was first reported on a warm summer afternoon, when the worry arrived quietly and stayed. Her name was Evelyn. She was 27 when she disappeared, living in a small coastal town where most people knew one another by sight if not by name. She worked at a bookstore near the pier, rented a modest apartment, and spoke often about plans that never sounded urgent. Nothing about her life suggested a sudden ending. On the day she vanished, Evelyn followed her routine. She opened the shop in the morning, helped a few customers, and closed early in the afternoon. A coworker remembered her smiling as she left, carrying a canvas bag and saying she would see everyone the next day. She never did. When Evelyn didn't return home that evening, her sister assumed she had stayed out late. By morning, the concern began to grow. Calls went unanswered. Messages remained unread. Police were contacted, and a search began with careful urgency. Her apartment was found undisturbed. Clothes were in the closet. Dishes were clean. Her passport was in a drawer. There were no signs of packing, no note, no indication of a planned departure. Her phone was missing. Her bag was gone. The search extended through the town and into nearby areas. Posters were placed along the boardwalk and in shop windows. Tips came in, most of them hopeful, some of them vague. A woman seen on a bus, a name overheard at a cafe. Each lead faded under scrutiny. Months passed. Then years. The case cooled slowly, not from lack of effort, but from lack of direction. Investigators revisited it occasionally, reviewing notes, re-interviewing witnesses, hoping for a small detail that might change everything. Nothing ever did. Evelyn's family learned to live with uncertainty. Holidays passed, birthdays came and went. Her room was kept the same for a long time, as if she might return to it. Eventually, it changed. Life moved forward, but the question remained. 20 years later, the call came without warning. Construction workers were clearing land outside a neighboring county, preparing for a new road. Beneath a layer of soil and overgrowth, they uncovered something that did not belong. Authorities were notified, and the area was secured. What they found confirmed what the family had feared for decades. The remains were identified through dental records and personal items preserved by the earth. Evelyn had been there for a long time, unnoticed, hidden by distance and time. The discovery brought answers, but not the kind anyone hopes for. Investigators reopened the case with renewed focus. They reconstructed timelines, reviewed old statements, and examined new evidence made possible by advances in technology. The quiet town was revisited, its old paths walked again with new questions in mind. What emerged was not a dramatic revelation, but a clearer picture. Evelyn had likely encountered someone she trusted, someone who knew the area, someone whose presence would not have raised alarm. The details were small and ordinary, which made them all the more difficult to see at the time. An arrest was eventually made, based on evidence that could not have been uncovered years earlier. The case moved through the system slowly, deliberately. Statements were given, facts were weighed, the truth, long buried, came into view. For Evelyn's family, the ending was complicated. There was grief, renewed and sharp. There was relief, quiet and heavy. The not knowing had finally ended, but it had been replaced by a certainty that could not be undone. The town remembered her again. Flowers appeared near the bookstore. People spoke her name aloud, some for the first time in years. The place where she had worked, walked and lived felt different, as if time had folded back on itself. Some mysteries end not with sudden clarity, but with patient persistence. Evelyn's story took 20 years to be found, and even then, it did not return what was lost, but it did return the truth. And sometimes after a long wait, that is all that remains to be brought home. The case with no witnesses unfolded in a place where people were always nearby, yet no one seemed to see anything. It happened in a busy residential area filled with apartment blocks, convenience stores, and cafes that stayed open late. Cars passed regularly. Lights glowed in windows. Life moved constantly. The man at the center of it was named Aaron. He was 34, lived alone and worked evening shifts at a nearby warehouse. His schedule meant he often returned home after midnight, blending into the quiet flow of late-night activity. Neighbors recognized him casually, but didn't know much about him. He nodded politely, kept his head down, and minded his own business. On the night he disappeared, Aaron left work at his usual time. Several co-workers remembered seeing him clock out, stretch briefly, and head toward the parking lot. Security footage confirmed it. He got into his car and drove away calmly. He never made it home. When Aaron failed to answer his phone the next day, his sister assumed he was asleep after a long shift. By the afternoon, concern began to grow. By evening, police were contacted. Aaron's car was found parked on a side street less than a mile from his apartment. It was a well-lit area, lined with buildings and regularly traveled by pedestrians. The car was locked. There was no damage. Inside were his jacket, his phone, and his wallet. Aaron was missing. Investigators canvassed the area immediately. They spoke to residents, store employees, and people who lived above the shops nearby. No one reported hearing a struggle. No one recalled seeing anyone enter or leave the car. No one remembered anything unusual at all. Cameras were everywhere, but they offered little help. Some didn't record continuously. Others captured only partial views. The footage showed Aaron's car pulling into the spot. After that, the angles failed to reveal anything useful. Shadows passed. Lights flickered. Faces were blurred beyond recognition. Police retraced Aaron's movements carefully. His phone showed no activity after he parked. His bank account remained untouched. There were no calls for help. No messages sent. No signs of panic. The lack of witnesses was the most unsettling part. This was not an isolated road or a forgotten place. People lived there. People walked there. And yet, no one saw anything that mattered. As weeks passed, theories emerged quietly. Perhaps Aaron met someone he knew. Perhaps he stepped away briefly and encountered danger. Perhaps the moment everyone missed was smaller than anyone realized. But without witnesses, every theory dissolved into uncertainty. Friends described Aaron as cautious. He wasn't impulsive. He didn't take risks. He had plans for the company. Months. He had recently talked about changing jobs, about saving for something better. Nothing suggested he was ready to disappear. The investigation slowed as time went on. Leads dried up. Repeated interviews yielded no new information. The area where his car was found returned to normal, filled with everyday movement and noise. Aaron's family struggled with the idea that something could happen in plain sight without being seen. They replayed maps and timelines, imagining moments where someone must have noticed something. A sound, a figure, a pause, but there was nothing. Years later, the case remains unresolved. Aaron's name stays attached to a file marked by absence rather than evidence. A disappearance without witnesses, without clarity, without closure. In a place where people were everywhere, the truth remained nowhere. And sometimes, that is the hardest kind of mystery to live with. The one that happens surrounded by life, yet leaves behind only silence. The man who knew too much lived quietly on the edge of the city, in a narrow house that looked no different from the others on the street. His name was Victor Lane, and to most people he was unremarkable. He kept regular hours, paid his rent on time, and avoided attention whenever possible. Neighbors described him as polite but distant, someone who preferred solitude to conversation. What few people knew was that Victor had once worked in a position that allowed him to see things most never would. Years earlier, he had been employed as a data analyst for a mid-sized logistics company. His job involved reviewing shipment records, internal reports, and system logs. At first, it was routine work, numbers, dates, and locations passing across his screen day after day. But over time, Victor began to notice patterns that didn't quite add up. Shipments rerouted without explanation. Records altered after approval. Gaps where information should have been. He raised questions quietly, first to a supervisor, then to a manager. Each time, he was told not to worry about it. The explanations were vague, dismissive. Eventually, he was advised to focus only on his assigned tasks. Victor did exactly that, at least on the surface. Privately, he kept notes. Nothing dramatic, just copies of reports, timestamps, and observations saved on an external drive. He told no one about it, not friends, not family. He wasn't trying to expose anything, he just felt uneasy ignoring what he had seen. A year later, Victor left the company. Officially, it was a mutual decision. He found a quieter job elsewhere and faded into the background. Life returned to something close to normal. Then, one evening, Victor failed to show up for work. At first, his employer assumed he was sick. By the next day, concern grew. Victor was not someone who missed shifts without notice. Calls went unanswered. Messages remained unread. Police were contacted. Victor's house was found locked. Inside, everything was orderly. His bed was made. His kitchen was clean. His phone sat on the table, powered off. His wallet was in a drawer. There were no signs of a struggle, no broken items, no indication that someone else had been there. But Victor was gone. Investigators spoke to neighbors. No one had seen him leave. No one reported visitors. Security cameras from nearby houses showed nothing out of the ordinary. Victor's car remained parked where it always was, untouched. When police examined his computer, they found little. His browsing history was unremarkable. His files were sparse. but something was missing. An external drive Victor was known to use was nowhere to be found. As the investigation continued, detectives learned more about Victor's former job. They reviewed records, spoke to former colleagues, and uncovered quiet tens. Ions that had never reached formal complaints. Several people recalled Victor asking questions others preferred not to answer. Still, there was no evidence linking any of it to his disappearance. Weeks passed. Then months. Victor's bank accounts remained untouched. There were no signs of travel, no new identity, no activity of any kind. The trail ended completely. Over time, the case lost momentum. Without proof of a crime, without witnesses, without a body, there was nowhere to go. Victor's file was marked inactive, but not closed. Those who knew about his past work couldn't help but wonder. Had Victor discovered something dangerous? Had he shared it with the wrong person? Or had he simply grown tired of carrying knowledge he couldn't use? No answers ever came. Victor Lane vanished quietly, leaving behind a life that looked ordinary, and a question that never found its voice. The information he may have held disappeared with him, sealed away somewhere unknown. And in the end, the man who knew too much became another name in a file, another absence without explanation, his story defined not by what he revealed, but by what was never recovered. A crime solved by a simple receipt began in a way that felt almost unimportant. The town was small, the kind where people recognized each other by routine rather than friendship. The streets were quiet, shops closed early, and most days passed without incident. When the call first came in, officers believed it would be resolved quickly. The man involved was named Leonard. He was 45, lived alone, and worked as a maintenance supervisor for a local school district. He was known as reliable, careful, and precise. He kept records of everything: appointments, expenses, and even small purchases. Friends teased him for it, but Leonard liked order. It made life predictable. One evening, Leonard didn't come home. His sister noticed. First, when his phone went unanswered. By the next day, concern turned into action. Police were contacted and a welfare check was arranged. Leonard's house was locked. Inside, everything appeared normal. The lights were off, the bed was made, his wallet and phone were on the kitchen counter, but Leonard was missing. Investigators looked for signs of trouble. There were none. No forced entry, no mess, no indication of a struggle. His car was still parked in the driveway, keys inside the house. It didn't make sense. If Leonard had left on foot, where had he gone and why had he left everything behind? The case seemed to stall almost immediately. Neighbors were questioned. No one remembered seeing Leonard that night. No visitors were reported. Security cameras from nearby homes showed nothing useful. His bank account showed no unusual activity. There were no large withdrawals, no sudden purchases, no signs of planning. Days passed, and the case began to feel like so many others: quiet, confusing, and directionless. Then, during a routine review of Leonard's belongings, an officer noticed something small. On the kitchen table, among neatly stacked papers, was a receipt. It was from a convenience store across town, dated the night Leonard disappeared, time-stamped just after 9:30 p.m. At first, it seemed insignificant. Leonard often stopped for small purchases. But this receipt placed him somewhere investigators hadn't considered yet. They checked the store's security footage. The video showed Leonard entering calmly, buying a bottle of water and a snack, and speaking briefly with the cashier. He didn't appear distressed. He left the store alone and walked toward the parking lot. But the camera angle captured something else as well. Another figure, lingering just outside, watching Leonard as he exited. The image was unclear, but it was enough. Police expanded their search to the area around the store. More cameras were reviewed. Piece by piece, Leonard's movements after leaving the store were reconstructed. He had walked toward a side street, one that led away from well-lit areas and into a quieter part of town. There, another camera caught a partial image of a vehicle slowing near the curb. The license plate wasn't fully visible, but it was enough to narrow the search. Investigators tracked down the vehicle, which belonged to a man with prior charges related to theft and assault. When questioned, his story shifted repeatedly. Timelines didn't match, details changed. Eventually, under pressure, he admitted to encountering Leonard that night. What followed was quiet and tragic: an argument. a moment of anger, a decision that couldn't be undone. Leonard's body was found days later in a wooded area outside town, guided by the confession that followed. The evidence trail started by a single piece of paper on a table. For Leonard's family, the answer came with grief, but also relief. The not knowing had ended. The simple receipt, something Leonard would have carefully saved without thought, became the key that unlocked the truth. In the end, the case served as a reminder that sometimes, the smallest details matter most. A forgotten slip of paper, easily overlooked, can hold the weight of an entire story. And in Leonard's orderly home, where everything had a place, it was that one small receipt that finally spoke when nothing else could. The voice message that played once began on a quiet night when most people were already asleep. It lasted only 17 seconds, recorded accidentally, and it would become the most important piece of evidence in a case that otherwise had none. The woman who disappeared was named Nora. She was 29, lived alone, and worked rotating shifts at a local hospital. Her hours were irregular, but her habits were full. She locked her doors. She texted when she arrived home. She let people know where she was going. On the night she vanished, Nora left work just after midnight. A coworker remembered her yawning, joking about being tired, and heading toward the parking lot. Security cameras showed her unlocking her car and getting inside. She drove away calmly. She never arrived home. When morning came and Nora didn't respond to messages, her sister assumed she was sleeping. By afternoon, concern crept in. By evening, police were contacted. Nora's car was found parked in her apartment complex lot, exactly where she usually left it. The doors were locked. There was no damage. Inside, her bag sat on the passenger seat. Her phone was missing. Investigators checked her apartment. The door was locked. Inside, nothing looked out of place. No signs of a struggle. No note. No indication she planned to go anywhere. Her phone records were examined. The last activity was a voicemail left on her own phone at 12:48 a.m. No one remembered leaving it. When investigators played the message, they heard muffled sounds at first. The faint hum of an engine, a soft rustling noise. Then Nora's voice, distant and unclear, as if the phone had been in her pocket. She wasn't speaking directly. It sounded like she didn't know she was recording. There was a pause. Then footsteps. Another voice appeared briefly, too faint to identify, followed by a sudden silence. The message ended abruptly. 17 seconds. Experts analyzed the audio repeatedly. They isolated background noise. They enhanced fragments of sound. The engine suggested a vehicle idling. The footsteps suggested movement on pavement. But nothing definitive emerged. The second voice could not be identified. Police canvassed the area between the hospital and Nora's home. They checked cameras along her route. Some footage showed her car driving norm. Ally. Others showed nothing useful. There was no clear point where something went wrong. Friends and coworkers were interviewed. No one reported unusual behavior. Nora had plans for the next day. She had spoken casually about future shifts. There were no signs of fear or distress. Weeks passed, and the voicemail became both the center of the case and its greatest frustration. It proved Nora had been alive after leaving work. It suggested she was not alone, but it refused to say more. The investigation slowed. Years later, the voicemail still exists, stored carefully in evidence. It has been replayed countless times, each listening filled with hope that something new might be heard. Nora was never found. The 17-second message remains the only sound of her after that night. Not a call for help, not a goodbye, just a fragment of a moment that slipped away before anyone could understand it. And sometimes, the most haunting mysteries are the ones that almost speak, but never quite tell their story. The house that sold too fast raised questions only after it was already empty. It stood at the end of a quiet cul-de-sac, freshly painted, windows clean, lawn trimmed neatly. To anyone passing by, it looked like a place ready for a new beginning. No one guessed it was the end of something else. The woman who lived there had been named Margaret. She was in her early 50s, divorced, and living alone after her children moved away. She worked part-time, kept her home meticulously, and spoke often about finally enjoying some peace. Neighbors described her as friendly but private, someone who valued routine and stability. Margaret had lived in that house for nearly 10 years. Then, suddenly, it was sold. The listing appeared without warning. No open houses, no conversations. Within days, the property changed hands for a price far below market value. The transaction was clean, fast, and quiet. To neighbors, it seemed odd, but not alarming. People make sudden decisions all the time. It wasn't until weeks later, when someone asked where Margaret had gone, that concern began to surface. No one had seen her move out. No moving truck, no farewell. Her car was gone. The porch light no longer came on at night. The mailbox filled briefly, then stopped receiving mail altogether. Police were contacted. Investigators found that the house had indeed been sold legally. The paperwork was complete. The signatures matched Margaret's records. There was no indication of fraud in the transaction itself. But when officers attempted to contact Margaret, they found nothing. Her phone number was disconnected. Her bank account showed no activity after the date of the sale. Her social media accounts were inactive. There were no travel records. No forwarding address. The new owners allowed police to inspect the house. Inside, it looked staged rather than lived in. Furniture was gone. Closets were empty. But in the garage, investigators found something overlooked. A small box of personal items, photographs, old letters, a set of keys labeled for doors that no longer existed, things people usually take with them. Neighbors were questioned again. No one remembered seeing Margaret after the sale. Some recalled her seeming distracted in the weeks before. Others remembered nothing unusual at all. There were no reports of arguments, visitors, or distress. Police looked into the real estate agent who handled the sale. Everything checked out. The buyer had been legitimate. The payment had gone into an account bearing Margaret's name, but that account had gone silent immediately afterward. As time passed, theories emerged quietly. Perhaps Margaret had chosen to leave everything behind and start over. Perhaps someone had pressured her. Perhaps the sale had been part of something darker. Without evidence, none of it could be proven. The case grew cold. Years later, the house is just another home. New families have lived there. Children have played in the driveway. Holidays have come and gone. The walls hold new memories now. Margaret was never found. The speed of the sale, once just an odd detail, became the most unsettling part of the story. A life settled carefully over years seemed to have been erased in days. And sometimes, when neighbors think back, they wonder what kind of urgency could make someone sell their home so quickly and disappear without taking the pieces of themselves that mattered most. The phone that kept ringing belonged to a man who never answered again. It rang on kitchen counters, inside a jacket pocket, and eventually inside an evidence bag, each time unanswered. Each time adding weight to a mystery that refused to settle. His name was Daniel. Daniel was 39, recently separated and living alone in a small townhouse on the outskirts of the city. He worked remotely, spoke often with his parents, and checked in regularly with his teenage daughter. Despite the changes in his personal life, those close to him said he seemed stable, even hopeful. He talked about the future carefully, as if rebuilding it piece by piece. On the evening he disappeared, Daniel spoke to his daughter on the phone. The conversation was ordinary. Homework, weekend plans, small jokes. Before hanging up, he said he would call again the next day. He didn't. The next morning, his parents tried reaching him. The phone rang, but there was no answer. Messages went to voicemail. By afternoon, concern had grown into alarm. Daniel always returned calls. Always. Police were contacted. Officers went to Daniel's townhouse. The front door was locked. Inside, everything looked normal. His laptop sat open on the desk, paused mid-task. A mug rested in e-sink, recently used. His car was parked outside, exactly where he usually left it. Daniel was gone. Investigators traced his phone signal and found it still active, pinging from inside the house. They searched every room again, carefully this time, but found nothing new. The phone itself was missing, yet it continued to ring when called. Hours later, a neighbor reported hearing a faint ringing sound coming from a storm drain near the edge of the property. Police searched the area and found Daniel's phone at the bottom of the drain. Still powered on, still ringing. There were no fingerprints that could be used. No signs of damage. No indication of how or why the phone ended up there. The discovery raised more questions than answers. Why would Daniel discard his phone? Why place it somewhere it might never be found? And where had he gone afterward? Investigators expanded the search to nearby areas. Woods were checked. Waterways were examined. Dogs were brought in. No trace of Daniel was found. His bank accounts showed no activity after that evening. His email went silent. His social media stopped updating. Everything pointed to a sudden, unexplained absence. Friends and family struggled most with the unanswered calls. They replayed voicemail greetings, hoping to hear something they had missed. They called the phone again and again in the early days, listening to it ring, imagining Daniel somewhere nearby, unable or unwilling to answer. Weeks turned into months. The case slowed, then stalled. Without evidence of a crime, investigators had little to pursue. Daniel's name remained in the system, attached to a file marked unresolved. The townhouse was eventually sold. New people moved in. The storm drain was cleared and forgotten. But the memory of that ringing phone lingered. For those who loved Daniel, it became a symbol of absence, a sound that connected the present to a moment that could not be reached again, a call that never found its answer. And sometimes, in the quiet moments of the night, they still imagine that phone ringing somewhere, waiting for a voice that will never return. The path through the park ended abruptly, not in trees or water, but in questions no one could answer. The park itself was large and well used, with walking trails that curved gently through open grass and shaded areas. Families visited during the day. Joggers passed through in the mornings. At night it grew quiet, but it was never truly isolated. The man who vanished there was named Ethan. Ethan was 28, physically fit, and careful by nature. He ran regularly and followed the same route through the park several times a week. Friends knew the path by description alone. It was familiar, safe, and well lit in most places. On the evening he disappeared, Ethan told his roommate he was going for a short run. Nothing unusual. He wore his running shoes, a light jacket, and a smartwatch that tracked his pace and location. He left his phone at home as he often did, preferring to run without distractions. He never came back. When Ethan hadn't returned after an hour, his roommate assumed he had taken a longer route. After 2 hours, concern set in. By midnight, police were contacted. Search teams were dispatched immediately. Officers and volunteers walked the trails, scanning with flashlights, calling Ethan's name. Dogs were brought in. Nothing was found that night. The next morning, investigators discovered Ethan's shoe near one of the trails. It wasn't damaged. It wasn't hidden. It simply lay there, as if it had been placed carefully on the ground. Farther along the path, his jacket was found folded neatly on a bench. Ethan was nowhere. His smartwatch was recovered near the edge of the park. Data showed that his run had ended suddenly. The tracking stopped in one location and never resumed. There were no erratic movements, no signs of a struggle recorded in the data. Just a clean stop. Police searched the surrounding area thoroughly. Nearby roads, waterways, and wooded sections were checked. Surveillance cameras at park entrances showed Ethan entering alone. None showed him leaving. Friends described Ethan as cautious. He didn't take risks. He didn't run late at night in unfamiliar places. He had plans for the next day, plans he had talked about casually, without hesitation. As days passed, the park became the focus of attention. Media coverage grew briefly, then faded. Searches continued, then slowed. Each new effort ended the same way, with nothing. The items left behind troubled investigators the most. Shoes don't come off easily during a run. Jackets aren't usually folded during emergencies. Everything suggested intention, but not explanation. Weeks turned into months. The case grew quiet. The park returned to its routine. Joggers passed the bench where the jacket had been found. Children played nearby. Life went on. Ethan was never found. The path through the park remains open, winding calmly through familiar scenery. But for those who know the story, it carries an invisible marker. A point where motion stopped, where a routine ended without warning. And sometimes, in the early hours of the morning, when the park is empty and still, it feels as though the trail itself is waiting for footsteps that never came back. The boat that drifted back alone was spotted just after sunrise, rocking gently near the shoreline, as if it had simply wandered there on its own. The water was calm that morning, reflecting pale light and carrying sound across long distances. Fishermen noticed the boat first. It wasn't tied, it wasn't anchored, it was just there. The name on the side belonged to a man named Lucas. Lucas was 35, experienced on the water, and known for being cautious. He had grown up near the coast and understood the rhythm of tides and weather. He owned a small motorboat and used it regularly, never venturing out without checking conditions and letting someone know where he planned to go. The evening before the boat was found, Lucas had told a friend he was heading out for a short trip before dark. Nothing ambitious, just time alone on the water, something he did often to clear his head. The weather report was favorable, the sea was steady. He never returned. When the boat was spotted drifting the next morning, authorities were notified immediately. The engine was off, there was no visible damage. Inside, everything looked normal. A life jacket lay on the seat, unused. A small cooler was still secured. His phone and wallet were inside a dry compartment. Lucas was gone. Search crews moved quickly. Boats scanned the surrounding waters. Helicopters flew overhead. Divers checked nearby areas. There were no signs of an accident. No debris. No indication that the boat had collided with anything. The tide patterns were analyzed. Experts concluded that the boat could not have drifted far on its own. Wherever Lucas had disappeared, it had been nearby. Friends and family were questioned. Lucas had no history of reckless behavior. He didn't swim at night. He didn't leave his boat while on open water. He had recently talked about future plans, small things, ordinary things, nothing that's suggested a desire to disappear. As days passed, the search expanded, and then slowly narrowed. Each effort ended with the same result: empty water, quiet horizons. Investigators examined the boat again, looking for details they might have missed. There were no signs of a struggle, no damage, no explanation. The absence of a life jacket was unsettling, but not conclusive. Lucas might have planned to stay on board the entire time. Weeks turned into months. The boat was eventually returned to the family. It sat unused, a reminder of an unanswered moment. The sea, vast and familiar, offered no clues. Lucas was never found. The water where he vanished continues to look calm on most days. Waves roll in steadily. Boats pass through without incident. To anyone unfamiliar with the story, it's just another stretch of coast. But for those who remember, it's the place where a man went out as he always had, and the sea sent back only his boat, drifting quietly, carrying nothing but questions. The elevator that reached the top floor carried no one inside. It arrived with a soft chime, doors sliding open to an empty space that should not have been empty. Office lights reflected off polished metal, and the quiet hum of machinery filled the pause where a person was expected to step out. The woman who vanished was named Isabel. Isabel worked late shifts at a corporate building downtown. She was known for her focus and professionalism, often staying after hours to finish projects without complaint. On the night she disappeared, several coworkers remembered saying goodbye to her as they left. She waved, smiled, and returned to her desk. Security footage showed Isabel leaving her office just before 11 p.m. She gathered her bag, turned off the lights, and walked toward the elevator bank. The building was mostly empty by then, its long hallways echoing with her footsteps. Cameras captured her entering the elevator alone. The doors closed. The elevator began to rise. When it reached the top floor, a restricted level used only for mechanical access, the doors opened. No one stepped out. After a brief pause, the doors closed again and the elevator returned to the ground floor, empty. Building security was alerted the next morning when Isabel failed to show up for work. They reviewed the footage repeatedly. The camera angle inside the elevator showed Isabel standing calmly near the panel. There was no sign of distress, no sudden movement, no interruption. And then, between frames, she was gone. There were no cameras inside the elevator shaft, no alarms were triggered, no maintenance issues were reported that night. The building's access logs showed no unusual entries. Police searched the entire building: stairwells, storage rooms, mechanical spaces. The elevator itself was inspected thoroughly. There were no signs of forced entry, no damage, no indication of an accident. Isabel's phone was found later in the elevator, tucked near the wall, powered off. Her wallet was in her bag, still at her desk. Friends and family were questioned. Isabel had no known enemies. She had plans for the weekend. She had recently talked about a vacation she was looking forward to. Nothing suggested she wanted to leave. As days passed, the elevator became the center of the mystery. Engineers tested it repeatedly. They examined logs, cables, and safety systems. Everything functioned as designed. There was no explanation for how someone could disappear from a moving elevator without leaving evidence behind. Weeks turned into months. The building returned to normal operations. Employees rode the same elevators every day, some glancing at the corners where Isabel had last been seen. Isabel was never found. The elevator still travels between floors, opening and closing, with mechanical precision. To most, it's just part of the building. But to those who know the story, it carries a quiet unease. A reminder that sometimes, even in places designed for control and safety, someone can vanish in the space between doors closing and opening again, leaving behind only a silent pause where a life once stood. The backpack left behind was discovered on a hiking trail just after dawn, resting against a wooden sign as if someone had set it down carefully and planned to return. The trail itself wound through familiar terrain, rocky in places, shaded by tall trees and well marked. It was popular with locals and rarely dangerous. The hiker who vanished was named Noah. Noah was 24, an outdoor enthusiast who knew the area well. He had hiked those trails dozens of times, sometimes alone, sometimes with friends. He respected the weather, carried supplies, and followed safety guidelines. That morning he told his roommate he was heading out early and would be back by afternoon. He never came home. When Noah didn't return by evening, concern set in. His phone went unanswered. By nightfall, authorities were contacted, and a search began immediately. The next morning, a volunteer found Noah's backpack near the midpoint of the trail. Inside were his water bottle, snacks, a map, and a small first aid kit. Everything he would normally carry was there. His jacket was folded neatly beside it. There were no signs of damage, no indication of a struggle, no broken branches or disturbed ground nearby. Search teams expanded their efforts quickly. Dogs tracked scent for a short distance before losing it completely. Helicopters scanned from above. Nearby ravines and off-trail areas were checked thoroughly. Nothing was found. Investigators reviewed trailhead cameras. Footage showed Noah arriving alone, adjusting his pack, and starting the hike calmly. There was no sign of anyone following him. No footage showed him leaving. Friends described Noah as cautious and thoughtful. He didn't wander off trails. He didn't hike recklessly. He had plans for the coming weeks and spoke excitedly about them. Nothing suggested he wanted to disappear. As days passed, the trail reopened to the public. Hikers walked past the spot where the backpack had been found, unaware of its significance. Nature continued as it always did, indifferent to unanswered questions. Weeks turned into months. Searches continued intermittently, driven by hope rather than evidence. Each effort ended quietly. Noah was never found. The backpack was returned to the family, its contents untouched. It became a symbol of a journey that stopped without explanation, of preparation without outcome. The trail remains open, winding peacefully through the landscape. But for those who know the story, it holds a silent marker. A place where someone prepared carefully, set everything down and then vanished, leaving behind only the weight of what was never finished. The voicemail sent to the wrong number was discovered, weeks after everything else had gone quiet. It sat unnoticed in a stranger's inbox, mixed in with spam calls and accidental messages, until curiosity finally led someone to listen. The voice belonged to a man named Aaron Cole. Aaron was 42, recently divorced, and trying to rebuild his life in small, careful steps. He had moved to a new city for work, rented a modest apartment, and kept in touch with his teenage son through regular calls. Friends described him as thoughtful, reserved, and cautious. He was not impulsive. He was not reckless. The day Aaron disappeared, he left work at his usual time. Co-workers remembered him shutting down his computer, saying goodbye, and mentioning that he planned to stop for dinner on the way home. Security footage showed him, exiting the building alone and walking toward his car. He never made it home. When Aaron didn't answer his phone that night, his son assumed he was busy. By the next morning, worry set in. Calls went unanswered. Messages remained unread. Police were contacted by the end of the day. Aaron's apartment was found locked. Inside, everything looked normal. His jacket was on the back of a chair. His laptop sat open on the desk. His suitcase was still in the closet. There were no signs of a struggle, no indication of packing or planning. His car was missing. 2 days later, the car was found parked in a shopping center lot across town. It was locked, undamaged, and clean. Inside were Aaron's wallet and keys. His phone was not there. Investigators searched the surrounding area and reviewed security footage. Cameras showed the car arriving late at night and parking carefully. The footage was too grainy to identify the driver clearly. No one remembered seeing Aaron in the area. The case stalled quickly. Then, weeks later, a woman checking her voicemail heard something unusual. The message was short, muffled, and clearly not meant for her. At first, she thought it was a mistake. Then she heard the voice again and realized it sounded afraid. The message was only 20 seconds long. Aaron's voice came through softly, as if he were speaking while trying not to be heard. He said a name that the woman didn't recognize. There was background noise, traffic, footsteps, and what sounded like a door closing. Then the call ended abruptly. The woman turned the message over to police. Investigators traced the call. It had been made from Aaron's phone on the night he disappeared, routed incorrectly due to a misdial. The location data placed the call near the shopping center where his car was later found. The voicemail confirmed what investigators had suspected, but could never prove. Aaron had N.O.T. disappeared willingly. He had been alive and in distress after leaving work. But the message raised new questions. Who was the name he said? Why had the call ended so suddenly? And where had he gone afterward? Despite renewed effort, no additional evidence surfaced. The voicemail offered a moment of clarity but no resolution. The voice was real. The fear was real. The rest remained hidden. Years later, Aaron was never found. The voicemail remains in evidence, played occasionally in the hope that someone, somewhere, might recognize the name or the sounds in the background. So far, no one has. Sometimes, the truth almost reaches the surface. It brushes against the world briefly, leaves a trace behind, and then slips away again. Aaron's story is remembered through that single misdirected message, a voice that found the wrong listener, and a mystery that never found its ending. The last train ticket was never used, even though it had been purchased only minutes before departure. It sat folded inside a wallet that would later be found untouched, as if time had stopped just after the decision to leave was made. The man was named Henry. Henry was 51, quiet, dependable, and deeply routine-driven. He worked as an accountant, lived alone after a long divorce, and rarely traveled without reason. When he did, he planned carefully. He kept receipts. He printed tickets. He followed schedules exactly. That evening, Henry arrived at the train station earlier than necessary. Security cameras showed him entering calmly, checking the departure board and walking to the ticket counter. He bought a one-way ticket to a nearby city, a place he had visited many times before for work. He had no luggage, just his coat and briefcase. Footage showed Henry standing on the platform, looking down the tracks. He checked his watch once. He adjusted his glasses. Everything about his posture, suggested waiting, not uncertainty. When the train arrived, people boarded. Henry did not. The train departed on time. The platform cleared. Cameras showed Henry walking away from the tracks toward the station exit. That was the last confirmed sighting of him. When Henry didn't arrive at his destination, the contact he was meant to meet assumed plans had changed. It wasn't until the next day, when calls went unanswered, that concern grew. Police were contacted, and the investigation began. Henry's apartment was found locked. Inside, everything was orderly. His bed was made. His calendar showed upcoming appointments. His phone was on the kitchen table, powered off. His wallet, containing the unused train ticket, was there. His briefcase was missing. Investigators reviewed station footage repeatedly. They tracked Henry from the entrance to the platform, then back toward the exit. But no camera captured him leaving the building. There was no footage of him entering a taxi, boarding a bus, or walking into nearby streets. Staff at the station were questioned. No one remembered speaking to him. No one recalled anything unusual. The station had been busy but uneventful. Bank records showed no activity after the ticket purchase. No withdrawals, no travel expenses, no attempts to use identification elsewhere. Henry's digital presence stopped completely that evening. As weeks passed, theories emerged quietly. Perhaps Henry met someone at the station. Perhaps he changed his mind and left another way. Perhaps the moment everyone missed was smaller than anyone realized. But no explanation fit all the facts. The unused ticket became the symbol of the case. Proof that Henry had planned to go somewhere, and proof that he never did. A decision paused halfway, without resolution. Years later, the case remains unsolved. The station continues to operate as always. Trains arrive, doors open, and passengers step on and off. Schedules are followed precisely. But somewhere between buying a ticket and boarding a train, Henry vanished, leaving behind a folded piece of paper, an unanswered question, and a journey that never began.